Welcome to the Industry Talks podcast hosted by Lenz Studio, where we interview film industry professionals about their experiences in the industry. We'll be your host today. I'm Jelan Maxwell. I'm a DOP here in Ottawa, Canada.
And I'm Fitch Jean, a filmmaker and director. Make sure to subscribe to keep up to date and follow us on Instagram at NDTalksPod and at Lenz Studio HQ.
Welcome to the show, Maxwell McGuire. How are you doing today, man?
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
Really happy to have you on from another director's perspective on the show, another creative. We've had some, mix of people, technical to creative. So happy to have another creative on.
Well, I hope not to let you guys down.
So, Max, for those who might not know who you are, do you want to give our audience a little introduction? Who is Maxwell McGuire?
Maxwell McGuire. I'm a Ottawa-based filmmaker. I've been making movies since I was 18 in 1999 in Ottawa.
Wow.
Didn't go pro until, I guess, 2009. And funny story about going pro, I had told myself if I didn't make it by 30, I was going to go back to school. Okay. And then at 29 and a half, I got my green light from Telefilm on my first bigger indie film. And I was like, I guess I'm stuck now.
Did you go to school, actually?
I didn't. Right out of high school, I started making mediocre independent films.
Hey, I love it, though. I
Interesting.
Love it. Yeah. How did you get into filmmaking in general? Like, have you always were you a photographer before, or were you?
I was a kid that made the improv team but quit to go skateboarding.
Hey, a skateboarder as well, actually. Oh, that's
awesome. I was Ottawa
nice.
skater and not as good as the kids that came after me, but my father and my uncle were hobbyist writers, and so I grew up around them writing screenplays that never got made for 10, 15 years as a kid. So, Robert McKee's story would be on the counter, Sid Fields, and then they'd have manuscripts that they'd mail out that they'd kind of get no answer back on, unfortunately. Wow. But I grew up around that. And then, so my father had wanted to be an actor when he was young, but his father was like, no way, you're going to be a professional. Mm-hmm. And so when I expressed any interest in it, he was like, absolutely, go for it. Wow. And so that led to an acting class or two as a kid, and then one or two failed auditions before I never went again. And I mentioned the improv team, but showing the expressed interest, he fanned the flames a bit. And when Robert Rodriguez made his famous El Mariachi and wrote that book, him and his brother said, let's make an independent film. Grammar was my strength in school.
Indie Talk 5.
Yeah. So this is a longer answer than I'm sure, but I took it upon myself to learn how to make a movie. And they bought a 16 millimeter camera from Toronto. That helped me make some friends in the Ottawa independent film world. People that wanted to play with film instead of video. It wasn't the same as when the guys after us came up. I mean, we were talking pre-HD.
I was going to ask, how was it to
We're talking
work
DVX.
in film?
We're talking
nice.
Film was crazy. It was a ton of money to not see anything you shot until weeks later.
Yeah.
Trust your light meter, as Robert Rodriguez said.
Wow. What was your role when you were were you kind of one-man banding it, or did you have a crew kind of with you?
I started off as a one-man band, and then having a camera did attract a couple people that, early Algonquin grads that might come and be a lighting designer. We didn't even know what a gaffer was when we made this film.
Right.
And then specifically, actually, I was at IFCO talking to them, and at that time they kind of said, well, Max, you got to pay your dues, do a couple short films, and maybe you can get a feature one day. And respectfully, I was so egotistic. I was like, well, I'm going to make a feature this summer. And a guy that was in there at the time, his name was Matthew Klink. He was just visiting too. He was a TV guy who had a show. You guys got to check out his show, Why Be Normal. It was from the 90s. Post Tom Green, Rogers TV to Comedy Network. They did this, him and all his friends. And he goes, yo, you're making a movie? He goes, I want to get into movies too. He goes, I said, yeah, I just lost a crew member today. He goes, oh, I got a guy you should meet. It ended up being my long-term collaborator, cinematographer. He introduced me to that night. We all became friends since 99, and all of us kind of went pro over the last decade at different times, and they're all still working.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he moved on to Belize to create a film industry down there, and he was actually murdered down there by a crew member.
That is...
over pennies.
Crazy.
That sounds like a movie, to be honest.
It is. I've actually thought about it, but it was so fresh. And,
wow. You've actually... Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because it's still unknown as to really what happened. The kids got off after a confession on a technicality that they weren't recorded properly, even though they clearly confessed.
Wow. Record everything, guys. Yeah.
That's insane. Wow.
Yeah. Not to make it about that, but he was a really cool filmmaker. He had done a telefilm thing and a bunch of things, and a bunch of careers launched out of Ottawa all at the same time. Cool. Anyhow, rest in peace, Matthew Klink.
Oh, yeah. Do you also write, or do you only direct?
Right. I write as well. I wrote a lot more back then, especially my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You got to write to get things made, especially off the top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I never loved the empty page, though. I like storytelling, but I never loved writing. I don't know if I'm an undiagnosed ADHD or
I'm
whatever.
the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I started bringing on collaborators on Foreverland, which was my biggest film.
Yeah, right.
I brought on a friend who had just come back from Hollywood after getting a big writing contract, and then unfortunately didn't get made. And I was like, hey, I'm writing this. Can I pay you $500 to sit in my parents' basement and write with me? And, yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you started Foreverland,
Yeah.
and you brought him on.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Can you talk about that? Because that's that's like your biggest.
That's my biggest personal film. I was like, I didn't realize at 29 what a feat it was to get your movie made. Not just make a movie, but one that was like your core story, which we all want to tell our first time, which is so... It's like a first album for musicians, right? You just pour it all out into one, and then you hope you don't mess it up on the follow-up.
And you were director, so you were writer
and director, yeah.
Producer?
No, I was produced out of Montreal and then Vancouver with a couple of Canada's bigger producers, and then Entertainment One, right when they split into a production company from... Like, they were a DVD distributor at one point back then. They had just kind of emerged, and then Bron Studios, producers of The Joker.
Wow.
Just getting into financing independent films, and I was one of their first.
Wow, that's unreal.
Yeah.
So how far were you? Because, I mean, this is a pretty big accomplishment.
Yeah.
How far were you in your career when this happened? You said you were 29?
A $5,000 feature at my cottage with 5 friends.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
So that's a pretty big step up.
It was too big. It was too big.
I mean, it looked like it turned out well. Like,
I was surrounded by pros. We had a really decent script. We had actors that believed in it and me, even though they had no cause to. After that $5,000 movie I showed in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, and then an empty screening in LA, I realized I hadn't pushed my positive negative charges in the script hard enough. I hadn't dug deep enough into it. It was a little bit too... I tried to make it a little bit more existential than it ought to have been, but at the end of the day, it was a little bit flatter than it should have been. And I went home and said, okay, life and death, okay, write what you know. I have cystic fibrosis, so I wrote a character about CF, and what do you do when you're planning your whole life to die? And then you find love. A reason to live.
That's what it... Because, when I saw it, I was like, this must come from Max's personal life to some degree because of that. Okay, very interesting. Yeah.
So, and then my writer Sean helped me craft a plot that, he was hammering plot on me, saying it's not just about you going out there and talking about your feelings. So the road trip's a physical representation of the internal journey, and then the things you come across. On the road trip, for instance, Juliette Lewis's character was loosely based on one of my family friends' early sayings when she was going through a hippie state, talking about karma as people bastardize the term. She had casually told my mother one day, well, you must have done something wrong in a past life to have 2 kids with cystic fibrosis.
Damn.
I mean, that seems dark and harsh, but in her world makes perfect sense. But then when you actually, pierce through it and analyze it, you're like, well, no, if you understood karma, it kind of means that we did something right because you're ending your cycles if you're ending early. I mean, you've learned everything you need to learn, but I can tell you from facts, I haven't learned everything I need to learn. So
that's an
I don't believe either.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but I took that and put it in a character, and we merged that and almost verbatim. And Juliette Lewis got to spit that line at my actors. So,
how was the process of making that film made? Like from the moment you started writing it to the moment it got made?
So as I said, after I wrote and showed Crossing the Wake, which was my $5,000 cottage film, I started writing this, and I brought my writer on. We had only a scriptman at that time, like a 64-page outline script hybrid. I was at lunch with somebody in LA, who somebody in Ottawa introduced me to if I was going there. He didn't come to the movie, but he said, let's go eat lunch. He goes, yeah, turn your movie on. You can make a indie film. What are you doing next? And we told him about this, and he liked it. Like me, said, don't go run off and make this with your friends. Let's see if we can raise some money from it. He was the closest to Hollywood that I'd ever been. He had made 20 movies with notable actors, and he didn't quite have the juice anymore to get this film made, but he handed me off to a producer in Montreal who took us to development money for Telefilm. And so, and that company had done a lot of service work in Montreal, and they were looking to hedge against tax credits and Canadian dollar and try to get more domestic product made so that they didn't rely on outside projects coming in. But I mean, that was when I was 25 we wrote it, so it took 25 to 30 to go to camera. And that was multiple false starts, multiple dinners where I called the family out and said, it's happening, pack your bags. We got a kid from, what's that, Edward, Twilight series, not Robert Pattinson, not Batman, but somebody else down the line was almost going to do it, and then schedules didn't line up, and you lose them, and then when you finally get your money, you're casting, you go to Mexico, you do some scouting, you come back, you think you have it all figured out, and then they tell you, no, we're not shooting there anymore, we're shooting here, look at these photos and pick your locations. It was wild. It was absolutely a trip, from crewing up to, but it was 5 years.
Wow.
Multiple rewrites, multiple meetings, and telefilm analysis is where I knew we already had their ear and they liked us. But we're sitting across the table and there's a head of marketing, there's a head of business, there's a head of production, and you're getting like quizzed. And even though I knew we had already scored high and we were like in a good place, the head of creative was like, there's a lot of like slapstick and then a lot of serious drama. Like, is that like basically why aren't you picking a lane was the sound of the question. And I'm looking down the line and I get a nod from one of the people who have already supported me, like answered out of politeness. And then, so I'm like, I don't think I'm the first that wanted to balance tragedy with comedy. I think Shakespeare did it better than any of us, and tragedy is best served with comedy was what he said, I think. And so I was like, yeah. So yes, you're right. There is a lot of tragedy and a lot of comedy. It's just how we get through life is laughing at darkness.
Yeah.
How did you compromise when you were in the process, that 5-year process before making the film, in terms of like not losing the vision of what the film originally was to trying to get it made?
There was times where I almost wanted to walk away because I felt the vision was being bastardized. And I now, having a lot more experience, I don't mind sharing the story because I recognize it wasn't that they were against me, people. It was that they were trying to make a movie, that they were worrying about buyers, they were worrying about sales.
Yeah, they're trying. It's a business. Yeah.
Exactly. And so a big point of contention in the film was show the disease in the first act, use the disease in the third act. I believed it was a tragic love story with a dark comedy. They're like, we spend 90 minutes getting to like this guy, we want him to live. I'm like, that was a big battle. Wow. Respectfully, and I still love you guys, but it was a big battle. Red ink emails, I think we sent each other. And they said he must live. And then, you know, we did the new draft, and actors are asking me like, hey, what's going on with the new ending? Love the script, but, and I mean, I'm kind of giving you guys under the hood here, this like 12-year secrets.
Yeah.
I said, hey, as a production, I stand behind our choices, but if you have these feelings, you should go let production know. And then somebody in the production group agreed with them, and they said, we got to try to kill him, and then we'll decide in the edit.
So you did 2 takes, two edits.
Not as written. The one that was written had everybody crying by page 95, and so this was like a compromise version of. So to answer your question, how do you maintain the vision? Filmmaking at a professional level, at a commercial level, is a series of compromises that you hope you don't lose everything. You hope you can hold on to the core and you battle the right fights. I don't have the clout to win every fight. Most filmmakers don't. I mean, even my producer in Montreal, who wanted to give me everything I wanted but couldn't get the movie made, said, hey, we had a film, I mean, it's starring Stephen Dorff, sort of like Point Break, an action thriller bank heist type thing, or I think it was that movie or another one, but he goes, you don't get final cut unless you're Spielberg for a reason. He goes, we had a movie where the guy shot a oneer on his bath scene with the woman and it showed nudity. It turned into a rated R instead of an AA. He goes, we lost 1,000 screens and went straight to art house and then out.
Wow.
And so he goes, that's why we don't give that out. Now, if you're the reason the movie's getting made, you get a bit more clout and you can make those choices. But on a commercial level, I now understand after making commercial movies for the last 5-10 years, why these things happen. And then so as a filmmaker, as a writer, you try not to write yourself into a corner that way. And you hope the story point is as salient in a room talking to you about it as it is at the top of Mount Rushmore. Like if, I don't know, you're compromising and you hope there's a lot of compromising in movie making professionally.
The balance between the art and the business, I guess.
Yeah, and it is a collaborative art. I mean, we can all go off and make our movies for $2, $5, $10 at home and nobody can tell us what to do, and I encourage everybody to do that as long as you can. Because as soon as you do go pro, there's parameters, there's expectations, there's servicing, there's I got emails from people I didn't even know who they were on edits.
Right.
And I'm like, I'd ask somebody, I'm like, do I have to listen to this? I'm like, well, you personally don't, but we do. And then we take all the notes and unify them down to what we all agree with. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, listen, if the movie was a hit, it wouldn't matter, right? But unfortunately, I fell into the, like, territory of it wasn't perfect. It was a nice movie. It was good. It was great performers. I was lucky to have all these people who wanted to be in the movie, but didn't nail it out of the park. And unless you nail it out of the park, there's another 20 coming through Telefilm next year. And only one or two are going to, you know what I mean? You get lost in the wash. And then I didn't have a next project in hand when I was at the festivals.
So you did do the festivals with it?
Yeah, not only that, even ones I wasn't at. I mean, I did Palm Springs. We sold out, and there was a lineup. It turns out the movie was more for older people. Turns out you have to have lived a bit to realize life's precious. Turns out you have, and so the themes, even though it was young, beautiful cast, it wasn't necessarily stylized to their, palette.
Yeah,
right.
But yeah, no, it was the first festival was Whistler Film Festival.
Okay.
And I brought out 20 friends because I was like, well, my writer didn't even buy a room for the night because he thought we were going to get booed out of the theater.
Oh my God.
It was a 4:00 Saturday premiere, not an ideal world premiere, but Whistler's a cool festival, sort of like a Canadian Sundance type thing, minus the clout. Overusing the C word, so I'll stop. And my buddy and I would go check at the box office, like, yo, how's the ticket sales? And the guy was like, oh, it's not bad, it's like half full right now, and that was the day before. We go back later that night. He's like, oh, yeah, it's 3/4. The morning of, like, yeah, a few tickets left. I'm like, what? And then an hour later, yeah, we're sold out.
Wow.
I ended up having to sit in the stairs of my own premiere, get my seat away. And
wow.
You heard people laugh. And then when it was quiet, you were worried. And then you look around, it's because they were crying. They laughed and cried at a movie I wrote with my buddy in my basement.
That's
God.
beautiful.
It's a dream,
Oh, it really was. And then an Oscar-nominated writer stood up, Peter Hedges. I think he wrote What's Eating Gilbert Grape. I'd have to look at his credits again. Maybe not that one. But he stood up and he thanked us for being here and making the movie, and that everybody in the audience had a privilege of seeing this movie.
Wow.
And that set the tone for Q&A, where we just teed off until they kicked us out.
Wow.
It was a really nice ending to a 5-year journey, and then Palm Springs selling out. And I rode around the festival that night with like all of our crew and friends and 20 people. You go to like the Bright Lights party, like, oh, we only have the 2 Maxes on the list. And then I'm like, we got 20 people behind us. Like we only got these guys. And then the head of the party's like, Max McGuire, the Foreverland crew, bring them in. And so we got to have our moment in the snow.
Yeah. What were your expectations after that? And what was the reality?
I made a couple critical errors out of like junior arrogance.
Yeah.
One, in 1999, my dad and I listened to the Dov Simmons producing tapes, audio tapes about producing.
Wow.
And a key thing was have your next project lined up, because you're never more as hot as before your actual project drops.
Right.
Because the potential's there, and nobody knows, and nobody wants to like miss. And so you can set up a couple of things before you're done. I thought, foolishly, I made a movie, I might get some offers, because it was at the time where you could still kind of pivot right into TV or whatever. Whereas now that's like a hard path to get into. Everybody wants it. And I didn't have something, and I kind of coasted after like 5 years of making the movie. I might have had like a little bit of a creative letdown. I was touring the movie, finishing the movie, yada, yada, yada.
You're probably tired.
Yeah, and I was also, we were raising money because of dealt with cystic fibrosis. Like, we toured around the world and raised like $250,000 for cystic fibrosis research worldwide.
Wow.
Which is like more than most Canadian films do in box office, but it doesn't count for box office. Therefore, it doesn't give you any clout in the telefilm world. Unfortunately, which I love them. They funded my movie. Please fund my next one. But it didn't show in the trades. You know what I mean? So you weren't seeing this heat. Whereas like I toured Italy, northern Italy, from Verona, or I guess from Venice on the east to Turin on the west of the mountains, and like it showed like 90 times.
Wow.
And they brought me down. I did 16 showings in 14 days. We logged like 4,000 miles in Italy. I did like national TV and radio and print there. Somebody brought me over to Ireland, and either way, I got to do these awesome things with the movie. But you wake up a year later and you haven't made another movie. And I hadn't written another movie. I had a concept, I had a thought, and it was actually, I was on a date. And the girl was like, yeah, that's cool, you made a movie. what next? And I was like, oh.
Wow.
Damn.
The next morning, I think I spit out like 20 or 30 pages of my next script. And then I got Telefilm money for that too, and OMDC money, writing money. And I just ran into an unfortunate scenario with a producer that didn't pay his bills, and a year of writing and a year and a half with that, and the movie didn't go anywhere, and I hadn't been paid. And so we had to get into some negotiated action, and all of a sudden, you're 2 years out and you haven't made a movie. And then these guys come to Ottawa with their TV movie game. And it was another filmmaker and another filmmaker I knew involved, and then a producer I knew. They said, hey, you're the only other guy in town that's made a real feature. Do you want to work? I said, yeah. And so that's how I pivoted into the TV movie world for a while.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
As a director, where do you feel that balance is for surviving and, like making money and, doing what you like, doing your creative stuff? Like, where's that balance for you?
You take that question a few different ways.
Actually, do you still feel like you're being creative?
100%.
Yeah.
There's so much involved in making movies that if you don't like even just the process, you gotta go.
Right.
Because every day is a battle. Like I was just telling you guys downstairs about coming in for that guy COVID, like you're thinking on your toes, you're using all your skills. What I love about directing is like all my ADHD lanes are in use at once.
Yeah.
I'm talking script, I'm talking actor management, I'm talking crew, I'm talking time, I'm talking producer expectations, I'm talking my own expectations. And so you just get this constant balance. Like I just feel like I'm alive when I'm directing. So I love directing, period. I love accomplishing. I love moving the boulder forward and finishing a movie. And then I think it's funny, some of the movies we get asked to make haven't been said. A million people watch them, somebody buys advertising, and I get hired to do it again. Now, as for the balance of the creative, that's a different kind of creative I'm talking about, right? You're talking about like the internally pleasing creative of saying something meaningful and loving every moment of it. But I've been on that side too, and you know what? All these other things are happening at the same time, and they chip away at that. Not your desire for it, but your mind gets split. And so what I love is I think I'm mastering the tech, I'm mastering the management of myself and other people, so that when I get my next shot to do my own, I'm like, that stuff ain't getting in the way anymore. I feel primed. I feel like battle ready now. Getting your reps in is something they don't talk about, right? Now it's cheaper to get your reps in as filmmakers, but when I was $20,000 or $30,000 in debt by the time I was 25 making indie films, and it was like a short, a feature, and like a featurette.
Wow.
And so I carried that debt. I was lucky. Listen, I'm relatively privileged, which is why they say it's a privileged filmmaker world historically, which is why we have all these new initiatives. But I lived in my parents' basement. They didn't give me money, but they gave me food and housing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big...
but that's massive to know that you don't have to pay your rent that night. And so you get to practice. And then I bartended on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night to pay my bills while managing, at that time, relatively serious illness. And so I was bartending at night and working at a bed and breakfast in the day, and my lung function had gone down like 10% in a year. And my doctor was like, yo, you got to pick one of the two.
Oh, my God.
You're burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah.
And so I dropped the bartending and went back to the bed and breakfast where I could write at night. So when the clients went to sleep, I wrote.
Actually, on that note, can you talk about a little bit of what's it like directing at a high level like you are with cystic fibrosis? That's a unique experience.
It was scarier when I was younger, ironically. I'll get to the happy ending after this, but when I used to lose 5 or 10 pounds making a movie out of stress, sweat, and just malnutrition, not knowing how to manage my health. What 25-year-old knows how to manage your health anyways? You normally just coast.
That's true.
And so, but as a CFer, you got to watch it, like your salt intake on a 35-degree day of heat, we sweat out more salt, so your electrolytes are firing off, and you can muscle cramping in the middle of a shot type thing. Losing weight, your lung function goes down. So I had to lose lung function and weight on all the movies. So when I got my first TV movie, I ended up getting a flu. I didn't tell anybody. Actually, Foreverland, in prep, I got a flu, because a virus can turn into something that can turn into a big lung infection. And I'm sitting in meetings, I realize I'm sweating. I can't concentrate. I'm holding in coughs, trying to be the face of strong. But I know I got to do a health check, with insurance, because it's a critical piece of the filmmaking infrastructure. You got to be insured.
Right. And
I told my producer, I'm really sick right now. I've already called home. They're sending me antibiotics. You got to push my physical. So they push it a week and a half later, and I know I respond well to antibiotics even at that time. I get better. I walk into the office, do my physical. The guy's like, "You're the healthiest CFer I've seen." I was like, "Well, how many have you seen?" He goes, 2, and the other one died.
Damn.
So it's like, I guess I am the healthiest. Anyhow, got healthy, made the movie, and we were all good. But it happened again. Like I get worried every time I made a movie because you're high stress, long hours, overnights. Whereas normally I have to take care of myself pretty regimented. Good food, good sleeping.
So you're still doing like 14-hour days?
Yeah. I mean, by the time you travel, get there, it's 12 of shooting, 1 of lunch, and then a half hour on either side of dealing with people. Plus you're watching dailies when you get home and thinking about the script for the next day. So 15? Wow. I mean, it's pretty much wake and go. I was going to say wake and bake, but no.
And is that like, do you have to do any like, because typically like a movie, like what, 2 to 3 weeks? And then you
3-week prep, 3-week shoot.
So can you do back-to-backs? Like, are you?
I've been overlapping. Wow. I did 6 movies last year.
Overlapping.
So finish a shoot, you start prep, but I'm already doing the edit for the last one while I'm on prep for the next one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So that's what I mean when I say I get to use all my lanes. And then you try to have a personal life and family life and pay your bills and do some things you like as well. So
how do you find balancing that actually?
Terribly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my fiance. I mean, I've been reading articles about it. There's like people, especially if you get on a
Congrats,
series.
by the way, on that.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
And I saw you guys recently bought a house.
We bought a house last
amazing.
year. Yeah, we renovated. We're in it now since January.
Amazing.
There's perks to going pro. How to manage it. I used to only do 2 or 3 movies tops a year. It's just been a crazy 2 years where I did 5 and 6. And so the past 2 years I haven't managed it well, but I used it time to sock away some cash I wasn't able to in my 20s and 30s when I was paying off my debts. I carried debt until Foreverland. That movie paid off my earlier film's debts.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And then, so I was even, then I ran into that issue on the previous film and, doesn't go far.
Right.
And so I just started adulting at 35, which is why I was able to finally find a partner who I was ready for and they were ready for me, and then start doing some adulting. I mean, it's hard because you're married to the craft as well.
Yeah.
I read Cameron Crowe's interview with Billy Wilder, and Billy Wilder's wife said, as soon as you realize you're number 2, you become number 1. You can't find a partner that's fighting your time. Mm-hmm. But as soon as she realized your passion is film, and now all of a sudden you can talk about all that stuff with her, well, then you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're talking passionately with your loved one about your work, and now the crossover gets muddy, but it helps if you integrate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, as somebody who's supportive and believes what you're doing.
Amazing. Congrats. Yeah. Happy for you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, like, we were just kind of talking about it, but like a 3-week production, but I think a lot of people like that are on set and they're on set, like they think about that a lot of time, but can you talk about the time before set? Because like,
of course,
yeah, like
prep.
You're saying 5 and 6 weeks. Like what is
prep is like more important than the shoot if you do it right.
100%.
It's finding locations, refining the script, casting, working with your key creatives. If you even get time in 3 weeks to work with your key creatives, they're there, but it's not like we're sitting down, like framing out the whole movie. Like we're sometimes by week 3, we're still looking for a key location. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's because he's come in so fast and go out so fast. Some people liken them to like just factory filmmaking, but the truth is every script comes with its own set of challenges. Exactly. Whether it's stunts, whether it's a key location. On the next one, I need a small town main street. We always go to Almont, but I hear the main street's ripped up for resurfacing. And so it's like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
So these things come up, and then you're refining the script like, well, I don't have this. So now what can we do? What is the point of the scene? What can we change it to? Mm-hmm. You hope you have that all done before you even start your 3-week prep, but the truth is sometimes it just doesn't happen, especially if you're coming off a movie and you didn't have time to even look at the script until you start.
So it's a little problem solving.
Yeah,
100%.
Creative problem
solving. That's all
solving.
it is problem solving, risk management, and then, you hate saying cut, but it's sometimes like, I can't do this, but I can do this. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather give you something I can do well than half-ass what you're asking for.
And you're so like for these movies like these, you're getting like what's the process like? You're getting these scripts.
Yeah,
and,
we get them handed off.
Are you choosing the ones you want to work on? Or
very rarely do you say no right now. As I said, I decided I'm in a period of growth on my personal life, trying to stack my bank right now.
Yeah.
But also, you don't want to let the team down. I mean, because you work so
Sure.
often with people, like there's just the assumption that you're going to roll over and like roll into another movie, not roll over like a dog. That's what a rollover is for us. You know, you of course you can say no, but there's also the fear of you say no, they bring somebody in that like better.
Yeah, he says no less. So
Yeah, it says no less and does it for less.
Yeah, that's also very true.
You still got that pitter patter of like the filmmaker that feels like he's not enough, right?
Of course.
Just drives so many of us. Like I got something to prove to myself, to them, to this, and you know, you're also building relationships. Yeah, I was able to, you know, I brought people into our fold, like my writer. He's now writing some of these and rewriting some of these, and
Actually, is there a lot of that? Like when a script comes in, is there a lot of like? I guess it depends on the script. So like
tons every time.
Wow,
because they're often the way these are made. Somebody bought a slew of ideas, and here you write this one, you write this one, you write this one. Oh, that's not quite what I thought.
Are you on that as well?
I've done so many rewrites.
You've done
uncredited.
Okay, wow.
I've done a handoff. I've done handing off to my friends. Especially once I got into doing 4, 5, 6 movies a year, I didn't have time to write. We wrote one. We co-wrote one, Sean and I, last year. Lemonade Stand Romance. Because we got given something that wasn't makeable. We just got handed a script that wasn't makeable. And for the first time, I was like, I think I have to say no. They're like, well, no, just give us your take on it.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Really? I'm like, so what parts of the script are you like, not stuck to anything? Lemonade Stand.
What was it that was unmakeable about it? Can you give those details? I don't know.
I don't it lacked romance, comedy, or structure. And it was a rom-com.
Well, that's
those
pretty
are
important things.
And so we had 6 weeks, I think, or 5 weeks, and we pitched an idea, and I was kind of like, hey, this is what we came up with in a week. Like, if you don't take it, I understand, but I can't just keep going back to the drawing board. And they took it. They said, go ahead, write it. We wrote it, and we were shooting it in like 4 weeks.
Oh,
wow.
Okay.
That's crazy. How involved are you in post-production in these TV movies?
Not a lot. I mean, as a local producer told me, even though I've never made a movie with him, Pierre David, he goes, this is a producer's medium. Like, this is my relationships with my buyers and my back end, and we have 5, 6, 10 movies going. We have, group deals at post houses, and we know the drill type thing. So this isn't your baby. And so I said, okay, once I understood it and didn't feel like I needed to fight for every frame in a cut, I was like, okay, I'll give you guys a minute and a half extra cut. Like, I'll shorten mine to 86 minutes. You're going to bring it to 84 and a half. You guys get to put your last fingerprints on it, claim it. It's now yours. I might disagree with your decisions, but that's the business. And I'm confident enough now in the choices we make along the road that that minute and a half isn't going to be the biggest difference. It might be a difference to me, but not to the viewer, which is ultimately what matters. And then not to the buyer.
Okay. So you're still involved in post?
I get to 2-week edit for a director cut before they look at it, and then I hand it off. And depending on how we're feeling, I stick on for notes. Like, I'll oversee their notes because the editor loves having me on as long as they can. Because often, again, like I was saying about my movie, you get notes from people you didn't even know existed. Happy to hand over, and then by that point, they've handed me a new script, and I'm already working on the next one.
So you can't even really be...
Yeah, and nor would I want to. I mean, like, you temp in your score with your temp music, and then you find out they wall-to-walled it or something like that, and that's just because sometimes they're moving things so quickly that there's ones you want to be more involved in, there's ones you're happy to hand off.
Okay. Do you ever see yourself doing some producing?
Do I ever... It's a funny question. Yeah, maybe eventually. I mean, especially on my own stuff, I'd like to at least be a co-producer, but I don't believe in being producer, director, writer, DP, all that's easy. It's easier to do when it's you and 5 people.
Yeah.
But there's the checks and balances that come from having a producer, especially a producer that cares about the project you're making as long as you're on the same page. It's something to have somebody say, hey, Max, you're going a little too far into that. You're leaning too dark into the existential. Let's remember the audience. And so it's nice to have someone say, hey, that's really great for, like, buy town at 12 midnight, but, like, if you want to be on 3,000 screens and reach as many people as you can. Again, it was sort of like Dov Simmons said in those tapes. I'm really pumping this guy's tapes from 1999. But there's a few pieces of wisdom. He goes, this is back when I had to go to Blockbuster and turn over movies to find, who made American Pie? He goes, you don't go to a guy who makes horror and pitch him your comedy just because he's a producer, unless he has comedy on a slate. Like, it's find your audience and make a movie for that people. And then that's Robert McKee too, is like figure out your genre, study the genre you're playing in, study the structure, study the reasons why, and then you make the best version of that with your pieces. I don't know if I'm answering the question. I'm diverging.
No, that's fine. That's fine. There's a big debate in the industry about going to school or not going to school.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
What's your take on it?
I think that
YouTube Academy, you know. That's all
I think that it depends. I think they both have their you know, like
merits,
you know, and I think it comes to where you are at in your situation, and you know.
And what part of your game needs tightening up? I mean, YouTube Academy is a very real thing. You guys know Will Smith, the DOP. I mean, these guys came from the modern era, modern gear, and tutorials. Like, we didn't have this stuff.
Right.
And so where I come out on school is when I talk to people, because I've been giving talks for years on when people choose to listen, is I would have gone in hindsight for the gear, for the free crew, and for the networking, but more importantly, the mentor.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't have when I skateboarded in a hunt club in Ottawa in 1994.
Nice.
And it's something I didn't have as a filmmaker. And so I feel like I had a lot of time spent learning the basics and studying the class, like the books, that somebody could have had a conversation like me, like this for an hour, and I would have learned a lot of what I learned in 5 years in an hour.
Do you feel you ever sort of got, maybe not a direct, perfect assigned mentor, but do you feel you ever got a mentor during your kind of journey?
I was lucky. A lot of people took me under their wing. It was initially actors, because when I made that first film in '99, it was older actors at ACTRA. Like, when I say older, they're probably 50, but now they're older. But a couple of them said, "Oh, this kid's making movies," and they brought me in to like operate the camera on their acting classes for ActorWorks and stuff like that. And then we'd go to lunch and we'd talk about their experiences and. You know,
I guess more the industry.
So it was industry. I was an orphan of the industry, or adopted by the industry. And then as I grew my game, I met different people, and then other filmmakers, which was so rare to befriend other filmmakers. But that group I was talking about, Matthew Klink, my cinematographer Christian, their producer Tom Michaels, who's produced some big movies in Canada and abroad, and then my writer, having that group of like-minded people that weren't friends before, that were just there for the work, I grew a lot from that too. And then different people, right? It's like when the student's ready, the teacher appears. There was an older Canadian indie filmmaker I met in Vancouver through some friends, and I was having some editing problems on a project, and he's like, "Rip out the fucking hard drives," pardon my French. He goes, "It's your goddamn film. You take it and burn them if you have to."
Wow.
I was okay, well, that's why you never quite broke, but I understand the sentiment, like when to say no. And I didn't know when to say no, but more importantly, even if I had said no, I didn't have the weight to back up my no. Whereas now I feel like I have a bit more understanding of why I would be saying no, as opposed to just the creative, emotional urge
You have a portfolio.
No. Yeah, and some more experience, really. Experience to say, hey, here's why.
Right.
I can do this, but it'll cost X, Y, Z if it's time or money. But this creatively, if you ruin this, you're taking this out. And if you're comfortable losing this massive emotional beat and wondering if the audience is going to care, then maybe we should, there's a bit of more, it's not Machiavellian so much as it's presenting other alternatives that other people might not be thinking of.
Right.
Sure. And so there's more of that. And so I wouldn't say I had a straight mentor. I'd say where I was in my career presented different people. Because then you come across other people as you're raising in your profession that are either as professional as you or a little bit more, and then you learn from their experiences. We talk business side, we talk contracts, we talk errors, and like that's what most of us do sitting around. It's like, oh, I really got beaten up on that one. But then we go out in the front of the premiere, we're like, everybody, that was great, thank you. And it's because you also, again, one of those guys was Tom. He told me at a Toronto Film Festival party, I was breaking right into my sad sack story about how I didn't do Foreverland right. And he pulled me aside and he goes, "Hey man, you're here. People want to celebrate the successes. They don't want to hear about your shitty story."
Damn.
And I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, I made a movie. Everybody, I made a movie. It's awesome. You should see it."
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, I needed a kick in the pants there."
Who are some of your inspiration as filmmakers?
I knew that question was coming all the time, and I never have a great answer because it's different times, different places. Ironically, I've not overusing that word, but I've done the least consuming as I've been ever in the past 2 or 3 years.
Just been busy.
Just because I've done the least reading, which like I sound like a backcountry hillbilly, but like it's because I'm still reading the same amount, but you're reading the same script 4 or 5 times, and you're reading 6 of them. So you're reading the equivalent of like 24, 25 scripts, plus whatever you can muster out in books on the can. So all to say, I haven't had as much time to think about the actual movies, but I love filmmakers that got to make their movies, like Alexander Payne, pre-scandal Woody Allen. I can't watch this stuff the same now, obviously, but he was a guy that got to make his movies with his sensibility, with his sense of humor, that had their place, in a corner of the audience's mind. But Alexander Payne's a great modern day example. I mean, Sideways and all those movies are awesome to me. I've never been a big blockbuster guy. I mean, I was gonna indie films in the past 10 years. I thought Chef was excellent. What was that movie? The drummer.
Whiplash.
Whiplash was one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And so anybody that gets to do that, I mean, I envy them.
Yeah.
And when it turns out right with that person, you're like, oh, that's what I want to do. But it takes a miracle to not only get your thing made, but then to also be at the right time and right place in your career to make your thing as good as everybody else thinks it can be. And then for the audience to also like it and then to have the support and find it. It's like it's lightning in a bottle. It's like every day is lightning in a bottle when you're actually shooting something, right? You're like, oh, that went as good as I hoped, or ooh, we missed that one, or how come that felt so much better in my mind, but I couldn't execute it? And, it's like when you get all that right, I don't know, that's the dream. When I made my first movie, the idea was like this, but then it ended up over here. My second one was like here, just a bit better this here. And then these ones are all one block. I'll call all my 20 TV movies one movie because they're one movie. But if I get the chance to make a movie and I ever get it to exactly what it was, I'll retire. I'll be like, okay, I did it. But I have a feeling it's always going to be out here because as soon as you've made it, as soon as you've done it, as soon as you're like, oh, I could have done this or I could have done that.
Yeah.
Revisionism. And,
You're your own worst critic.
It's nothing is ever perfect, right? You're always chasing something.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
Which is good.
That's what makes you better, right?
That's, I hope, yeah.
Like I was watching Masterclass and I was watching Martin Scorsese and he was saying that he always gets physically ill when he sees his first cut. Right?
Always.
Because it's like...
You feel the same way?
Oh, 100%.
Is that what I made?
Yeah, no, it always feels like the worst of everything. How did every bad decision I made end up in the cut? And then you hope it's is the editor a bad cutter? No, it's a process. It's a process. And that's what I tell people now. Like my editors, I'm like, okay, I know we're at 105 minutes. I know we're delivering 85. Do me a favor and just get me down to 100 or 99. I don't want to watch 105. Especially I know there's fat tips and tails on shots, and they think I shoot a lot of footage, and so they think you want every shot, so it tends to be more cutty off the top, my cuts. I'm like, no, just because I shot the 5, I mean, if 3 look good, let's use 3. I'm just giving myself options.
So is that always kind of the problem? It's always you're always trying to get it down?
Yeah, I mean, and I cut our scripts, because our friend in town had a problem with timing on a film once, and I hear he delivered a short film, and so forever after that, he shot 105-page scripts. If you're delivering 85 minutes, you're leaving 20 plus on the ground because that's a 105 script, but that might be a 120 cut.
Yeah.
Gordon Yang's a local AD, director, DOP, and he goes, his first cut was 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that.
Oh my God.
And he's got to bring it down to 85 minutes. I was like, he goes, so much time spent on stuff that doesn't make it into the movie. So I cut my scripts down to 93 pages so that I get 7 to 8 minutes of playroom. Because at that point you can pace up the first act or the first half, which is usually what they're all trying to do to get to the commercial break, hook people hard and then let them suffer through too many commercials. But I try to shoot most of what will end up in the movie. You leave room for a few lines here and there to get cut, but I try not to shoot scenes that don't end up in the movie. And when I do, I'm like, oh, that was 2 hours I could have spent on something else.
Right.
I break it down like Hugh Grant in About a Boy, 15-minute time slots.
What are some things that you would say to a younger audience? Some tips that you would give them, someone that's trying to get into directing, for example, as an advice?
I do. like filmmaker feedback at Digi60 festivals.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the people decide to come and just sit with me for a couple hours. We talk like this about their movie, and I try to remind them, like, this is the time to keep making those things. Make as many errors as you can on these $400 or $500 DSLR indies and shorts and everything, and use them to make network, to find like-minded people, and then just keep doing it, right? But then don't keep making the same mistakes, though. Critical analysis. Pat yourself on the back for making the first one. That's why I asked them, do you actually want to hear, do you want some constructive criticism, or do you want to just be told you're awesome, you made a movie? There's a piece of us that won't admit it, but we also just want to be told, yes, that was awesome, it's perfect, come to Hollywood. But as you said about self-betterment, I mean, it's, if you discover the drive to be better, and not just blame the elements, I ran out of time, or my guy couldn't remember his lines. If you figure out what part of that is you, and you control that next time, well, okay, if you have problems with lines, let's figure those out ahead of time. Let's do more rehearsal. That shot wasn't as well. Why not? Was it lighting? Was it framing? Was it camera? If you decide to figure out everything in your power to get better, your movies will get better. And so it's that, like, which came first. I don't think anybody comes out the gate great. And when these guys do hit it on their first movies, congratulations, Xavier Dolan. But he came from theater. He had professional actors around him his whole life. He had access to this. And so that doesn't take anything away from his skill set, but I mean, it just raises your base level of knowledge before you even start.
Or Sam Mendes as well.
A theater director.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, when you're already dealing with some of the best talent in the world, you know how to spot it. But when we're coming from Ottawa and just trying to learn, it's up to us to realize what we're doing wrong and fix that. And so I would say master the art of, constructive self-criticism. Surround yourself with people that you trust and want to help you get better, want to get better in themselves. Because it's not like they're just going to be critics. They're hopefully doing that to themselves as well. And then if you're all doing that to yourselves, your movies will get better. And then have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And don't do it for the goal. I mean, I don't know how I got lucky and got my chance to make a movie and everything else. I do know how I talked about it. But only in hindsight can I trace it back, all the decisions.
Yeah.
It's about the journey.
Enjoy
it. Exactly.
100%.
Yeah. Someone told me once that you don't need to be great to get started. You just need to get started to become great.
100%.
Okay.
100%. No, and likewise, practically, my first AD in Foreverland, we had a rough first cut, and we were testing too early, and I was feeling really down about some comments. And he goes, "Your worst movie is better than every critic's non-movie."
That is true.
That is very true.
People can sit around and comment all they want.
You're actually doing it.
They didn't have to do it, exactly. Awesome. And so I was like, okay. And he goes, and they will get better.
Yeah.
I think on that note is a perfect place to wrap it up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you guys
for joining us.
This was great.
Do you want to do a little plug for yourself, IG and socials and whatnot?
Sure, IG Maxwell McGuire. You're going to see a lot of my on-set stuff in the stories of my dog, and then my website is maxwellmcguirefilm.com.
All right.
You can see trailers and read about me.
Cool.
Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. This has been another episode of the Indie Talks Pod. So make sure you subscribe for more episodes, for more special guests like Max. And follow us at Lenz Studio HQ, at Indie Talks Pod, and see you guys on the next one.
Peace. We're all gonna do it. Peace out.